So quite a while back, it was a boring day at the ranch as a boy, and there are always things to do to get in trouble. And we had a very large drainage ditch that ran by the back of the property and a road that crossed this ditch. So as kids, we thought it would be fun to have a dirt clod fight. Now, if you don't know what a dirt clod is, it's basically dry, caked pieces of clay. You can easily grab it off of the ground and start tossing at one another. Now, as kids, it didn't occur to us that someone could get hurt. It also didn't occur to us that a car could pass by on that road. So sure enough, one of my first dirt clods tossed it, and it was like a smack, and the car screeched to a halt. People got out, and my dad wasn't pleased. That evening I got spanked, and I got sent into the corner. They didn't call it a timeout yet, but that's what it was. And so that started this phase of contrition. And it starts off with that first phase. It wasn't my fault. This was unfair. And the punishment was unfair. So I'd sit around, I'd stew, and I'd think about that. And then it would start to shift. And I could still feel the pain on my bottom with the spanking. And I thought, well, I'm going to do something that I can do that I can get my dad back. I can cause some pain to him as well. And so I started thinking about that. What's the thing that I could do that would make it most painful for my dad? And I decided the best thing to do was run away. Also, it didn't occur to me that may not have been a punishment for my dad, but the practicality of what I was proposing started to set in, and I needed things. And so I started thinking, I wasn't a clothes guy, a pair of shorts, a t-shirt, some shoes, fine. But there were games, there were magazines, there were snacks, and maybe this kind of led up to being an architect. I started picturing the amount of space I needed to carry the things that I had, and I pictured my little backpack, and I realized it wasn't going to work. So by the time I kind of went through that second phase of contrition, it led to this third one, and I actually sat down and thought about what I had done. Maybe it wasn't the best idea to throw dirt clods at people. Maybe it wasn't the smartest thing doing this where I could have caused an accident. All those things started to come into my mind, and sure enough, after I don't know how much time sitting in that corner, I realized I had done something wrong. So when I was ready, I stood up, found my dad in the kitchen. Of course, I'm gazing up at him. I tell him I'm sorry, and I meant it. I was sorry. And he looked down at me, and he smiled, and he forgave me. And at that moment, life returned back to normal, at least for the next couple of days, until inevitably the pattern repeated itself. Now, in today's readings, they point to this journey between deeds of evil, or not so good, and doing what is good and true, of the slow personal movement from darkness into light, from unbelief to unbelief, and the tension experienced between condemnation and salvation. And for our first reading, we hear the princes, priests, and people of Judah committing infidelity upon infidelity against God. And the Lord punishes them by allowing them to be conquered and taken to Babylon. But the Lord provided a pathway back home after a 70-year timeout. You can hear the Jewish people's collective anguish in the psalm, upset that their captors wanted them to sing songs of Zion to be joyful. But how could they be joyful in a foreign land? If I forget you, Jerusalem, let my tongue be silenced. Let my right hand wither. Let my tongue cleave to my mouth. As we face our transgressions, Paul describes God's great mercy and love for us. By grace we have been saved, raised up with Christ. And this grace is a gift, not won for works, undeserved, but those works pointing towards Christ help us move toward the light. Our gospel passage begins with Jesus telling Nicodemus, "The time Moses placed a serpent on a pole in the desert. It was as a way for the Jews who were bit by venomous snakes as punishment for losing their patience with Moses and with God, to be healed by simply gazing on the instrument of their death. That is, they must see the image of their sin and acknowledge their wrongdoing in order to accept God's gift of life." We're now in the fourth week of Lent. And considering why these readings are part of the Mass today, consider the unique nature of Lent. It's been a year since our last Lenten season. That time to re-examine our faith, to root out patterns of behavior that lead us into the darkness, and practice behavior that lead us to the light. But again, it's been a year, and life has a way of distracting our efforts. The Old Testament is full of stories that follow the same pattern. A people who come to know God, love God, but eventually fall away. A people who become more sinful, so much so that they're punished. It takes time to become aware of their misdeeds and repent. And in doing so, a merciful and loving God saves them. And the pattern is repeated, just like the ranch. Thinking about yourself, how has this Lent been for you? Maybe it's a discussion the family can have over dinner tonight. What has been your struggles? What has given you solace? Lent is kind of like picking off the scabs of faith, digging into what are your pains, your sufferings, your shortcomings. On Good Friday, Jesus will be lifted onto the cross, just as he tells Nicodemus. We will gather here, and with all the thoughts of this Lent with us, hopefully with a greater awareness of our brokenness, we will have a chance to gaze upon the instrument, not of our death, but the death of the Son of Man, given to us as a gift from the Father to be our bridge to salvation. Our brokenness is that cross, but belief in the one on that cross is the goal of our journey from unbelief to belief.